Well, thanks everybody for coming out to this 35th anniversary Transformers panel. And we're so lucky to have some amazing voice actors here from the series. Let's give everybody a big round of applause. And just to start us all off, to kind of give some faces to voices, can I have you guys introduce yourselves and tell all of our fans here?
I'm Gregg Berger.
On the show. Yeah.
Check one.
Check. We're all supposed to say we're Gregg Berger.
Yes, it's supposed to say we're Gregg Berger.
And Greg, can you tell us?
And I'm Michael Bell.
Trayvon Martin.
And I'm Trayvon Monroe. Okay.
Whoa! Wasn't it? We're all Trayvon Martin.
Well, that's
Michael Bell.
Dan Gilvezan.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Gregg Berger.
And
You
I'm
can't go
not.
too far over.
I'm Paul Eiding.
So where's Mike stand I've ever seen?
I didn't think of the rectal mics. It's so much easier to read.
Oh, brilliant. Very shareable.
Well, guys, obviously, over the decades, this series has become just such a huge cultural icon. I mean, it's still so lasting. Can you tell us a little bit about the moment when each of you kind of first realized what a life Transformers was going to be?
I never did.
I haven't yet.
I'm waiting.
A what?
All right, I'll be serious for a minute.
Yeah.
It was the first convention I ever did, and I think it was like 2009, I think. And I think it was in Chicago, and there was a large turnout, and I said, wow, I didn't quite understand that this was as popular as it had become for so many people. So that's when I realized it.
I realized it when someone at the first convention I did around the same time asked me if I was Stan Lee.
What'd you tell him?
I said, do I look like I'm 90 years old?
Yeah, and I agree. My first convention was a BotCon in 2010 in Orlando. And number one, I was shocked that there was a convention for just Transformers, because we all do a lot of other things. But it was huge, and the response from the fans was incredible. And that's when I really realized what we were lucky to be part of.
I think we're all saying the same thing in different ways. It was a progression. There's the time when you find out that the show is renewed. There's the time you find out that the show is gaining audience. There's all of those times. But when we finished our initial work on it, we all waved a fond farewell to it. It was a job well done, and everybody moved on with their life. The first BotCon I went to was with Michael Bell and John Stevenson. We walked into the lobby, and we were swarmed. We got onto the elevator, and the entire lobby tried to get on the elevator with us. And that was the first time, not only did we realize that the show had longevity, even though it had undergone different twists and turns and changes over the years, people still had this loyalty and love for Generation 1 that we became aware of in that way. And ever since then, these convention appearances and the appearance of things like voice chasers on the web behind the voice actors, there's been an interest in voice actors in general, but the gift of meeting fandom one-on-one, I think, has blown all of our collective and individual minds, and it's fantastic.
And we have a new member who has just joined us.
Young.
I don't recognize him, but
A new
perhaps he
kid.
can tell you a bit about himself.
He's the youngest member of this group.
That's right.
Hi, I'm the youngest member.
That's enough of that, huh?
That's enough.
What are we doing,
Just
Transformers?
introduce yourself and, yeah.
Oh, who are we this time?
Become iconic. Did we think it would be become iconic?
No, I thought, pay me and I'll go home and I'll see you next time. I had no idea. First place that I do another episode of that, and certainly 30 years later, never thought that these Comic-Cons would happen and that we have an audience that grew up with us and 90% of them say you voiced my childhood, to which I respond, did I keep you out of trouble? That's more important. And been wonderful. Those audiences have been marvelous. And to realize that we had an effect on you coming home from school, or you had problems at home, dysfunctional families, and you got your solace in education and entertainment in what we accidentally were cast in. It's just fantastic, and I'm glad to see you all here.
And that kind of leads into my
That
next.
was nicely said. Go ahead.
Pardon me?
I was gonna say, that leads into my next question, which is, all of you were doing so many voices on so many shows at the time. I mean, it really feels like the 70s and 80s in particular were a real golden era for animation and for shows like this. Was there a sense while you were doing Transformers that this one was gonna be a little bit more special than some of the others, or is it just impossible to tell in the moment?
Well, for me, it was, and I think probably for most of us, it was another job. You know, it's hard to realize that we don't foresee something, because that's a trap. If you think, oh, this is going to be big, or this is going to be huge, but you don't know. And also, I'm not sure, I certainly wasn't aware of the fact at the time that a show's success might be predicated not just on an audience watching, but on the figures that were sold by the company, like Hasbro, et cetera, and how successful that was. I recall doing a show, doing one of the Transformers, and B.J. Ward, who played Scarlet, she played Scarlet, I believe, and she said, I don't understand. We've done so many shows, but slowly but surely, I'm not in as many scripts. And I said, it's because your doll isn't selling. I had no idea how close I was, that pretty much was the case, because most of the women were not watching at that time Transformers. So the reality is that a lot of that is predicated, a lot of shows even today are predicated on what characters sell in the stores. And you know, for us, and I'm sure for Hasbro, because as you know, they keep coming up with new characters all the time for the old characters. Because I know we all do, we get the adventure characters, and we look at it and we see that it looks different than the original. That's so they can sell it. Our only hope is that they would come back with the series again, and I'm not talking to Michael Bay, and hire us again, because as I explained to most of the producers out there that I talked to regarding old shows that are coming back, my ass may have dropped, but my voice is pretty much the same.
I just want to point out that my ass has not dropped. It's still in pretty good shape. I can't speak for Michael, and I'm not going to. You mentioned that there was so much work in the 80s, and the reason for that is the toy companies saw what we were doing with G.I. Joe and Transformers, which were, in some people's minds, a half-an-hour toy commercial. So just about every toy company in America and some in Europe said, I want a 65-episode series to advertise my toys. So that's why one of the reasons we were all so busy in the 80s was because there were all of these 65-episode series, most of which you've forgotten or don't even know about because they don't have the kind of legs that Transformers does. G.I. Joe is also still very popular. But we did tons and tons of shows, guested on shows, were regulars on shows that you've never even heard of because they came and they went. So we're lucky to have been involved in this particular franchise as the Hasbro, I called it a show and the Hasbro people call it a franchise. You know, I didn't know I was part of a franchise. I'm thrilled to be part of a franchise. Gregg?
Hey, I didn't know we had to bring visual aids.
It's good.
There's another factor to it. You asked if we knew we were part of a golden age. We know those are things you know more in retrospect than you do in the moment, and yet we sort of knew it in the moment too, because there was a smaller dugout or bleachers of people who were in it, and you'd see the same people over and over again. There's also a casting dilemma in every show, and I think Wally, to his credit, chose in the original Inner Circle people who launched not only jobs but careers. We all still see each other over and over and over and over again, over decades, through a lifetime, through careers. I think as things have expanded in subsequent years, there's sort of, I think there was a comfort in knowing that there was this sort of major league of voiceover people who you would hear over and over and over and over again, and I think the audience kind of liked that the same way we liked it. Not that you shouldn't expand, but if you become so obsessed with expanding so that every new character has someone who has never been heard from before, that's good in one sense, but in another sense, it ends that golden age. I think we had what I approximate to a presence in the golden age of radio, where the people I know who were in that would go cab to cab, run across New York because you were about to be on in another live present. We needed air traffic controllers. We were so busy, we didn't even know where we were going next. So we had to have agents as intermediaries just to sort of keep our calendars straight. It was magical, but you only know it was magical in retrospect when you realize how frantically busy we all were and how incredibly wonderful a gift that was that we received.
I knew it was magical because I would go from one session to another session, and in between I would have an audition for a TV show or something else, and I would have to change my clothes while driving because I had no time in between. So
Kids, don't try this at home.
And it was magical that I didn't kill anyone or no one killed me, because I'm talking shirt, pants, shoes, put on a tie and all that while you're driving because we were so busy. Now, as far as franchises were concerned, I'm one of the few Transformers that was also a GoBot. Now, the GoBots didn't sell the way Transformers did. And for whatever reason that is. Hasbro knew what they were doing, knew how to do it. I think also what Gregg was talking about, when you have this group of talent, it's just like the major leagues or any, whether it's soccer or baseball or basketball, you have X number of players and you expand and keep expanding and expanding, then you've got to spread those players out and you bring in new talent, and it takes time for that new talent to get on board, to really understand what they're doing. And we were lucky enough to be in that time when we were it for a long time. And for me, it started at Hanna-Barbera before the Transformers. And I can't tell you, I keep being surprised in finding out, oh yeah, Gregg and I worked on, I don't know how many series together. The Toxic Crusaders, which is another one, had great toys, really ridiculous toys, but it just never lasted more than a season or two. So there was something special about Transformers. I think also the fact that it took 8 hours to do an episode may have had something to do with it, with Wally Burr directing it and making sure he got it exactly the way he wanted it. Not necessarily the way some of the talents could deal with him. It was kind of tough that way, but whatever it was, it worked. And we, like I said, we're all really lucky.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about what the recording sessions were like for the show? Like, are you guys
They were hell.
all in there together? Are you
They were
isolated?
hell.
How?
No, we were all together. It got so crowded in that room at one point.
How crowded did it get?
It was so crowded that when we sat around the house, we sat around the house. Wally actually had to install you guys remember this, an audio system. So a lot of the players would be out in the lobby waiting because the recording studio itself was so full of actors. You'd have to wait out there, and before your scene or whatever, whenever you were involved in the show, they would say,
Michael Bell, get ready, you're coming in, and Alan, and Dan, you're up next.
And that people that had just finished would go out and the other people would come in. That's how crowded it was in there. It was madness. Am I wrong?
No, you're right, in fact, but I always, after the first couple of shows, I had a mandate. I wouldn't go in the room when Chris Latta was working.
Or next to him.
Or next to
Unless you
him.
wanted to get a shower.
Yeah, because Chris always spit when he worked. English actors do that, but Chris did it, and he's not English. Rest his soul, Chris would do his character at Cobra Commander or Starscream, whatever it was, and it would be huge, and he would turn and whip his head around, and loud, and sweat would pour off his head and his ears and you'd leave and you'd be sopping wet. And so, and we also had, I think, 2 girls or 3 girls sometimes in the sessions with Sue Blue, Mary McDonald Lewis, and B.J. Ward. Those are the 3 ladies. So it was kind of like a men's club with 3 women having to pretty much put up with us. And it was hot in there. I know I left one session, I had grown mushrooms on my chest. So believe me, this was 8 hours of fun, but it was like fun hell, with a little hell at the end of it.
Something was said before, I try to remember it because there's been a lot of intervening before it came back to me. But anyway, we're talking about the number of jobs that we would do in a day or a week. And I remember I was on a Star Trek set with Bill Shallard, another wonderful actor and voice actor. And I passed his dressing room and he called me over. He says, "Do you realize how many voiceover jobs we're losing by being here today?" And that really was. We would work 2-3 sessions a day, plus auditions. I never had to change clothes, by the way. I may have changed toupees, but that's
Paul
about it.
didn't have to either, he just did it.
Oh, no. What a guy, what a guy. Now, about the toys, I did a marvelous series that only lasted 1 season called The Wuzzles. And it was canceled because the toys weren't ready. And Gummy Bears was. So you see, the franchise, what the emphasis was on. Thank you very much. I'm here all week. How's your steak?
Okay, why don't you go? What's your next question?
So, I think you guys have all created such iconic characters from the show. They're all so fully realized and they have an incredible amount of nuance, especially since you guys are playing multiple characters on each show. How much is on the page when you get it? And how much of it is left up to sort of your interpretation of how to bring these people to life?
What an interesting, it's a good question. You want to
Just for me, you know, what they give you a prototype, a drawing generally, of the character, and you generally get your choice of 1 or 2 or whatever it was, and once we got into the show and we all got jobs, they pretty much give you the character and say, you're going to play this character, you do this one. And so what you wind up, and because I teach voice animation, you wind up being Mr. Potato Head. Everybody knows what Mr. Potato Head is. You change the eyebrow, you change the nose, you change the mouth, and it becomes a different character. You change the hair, you change the ears, but it's still you. It's still who you are. You're still the basis, obviously. So you have to add a dialect, or you raise your voice just a little bit, or the attitude becomes just slightly different because you may have another character that's happening. Sometimes I prepare for a character, and Dan, who got another character possibly, or possibly Gregg got another character, or Paul, or Alan, that was a character I was going to do. I was going to play this, maybe this was another character, and go, well, that was mine.
Yeah, that's right.
I was going to do that
I
one.
was doing Southern.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was going to do Southern. I said, no, I can't be Southern.
Yeah.
Where can I go with this? I'll have to try something else. That's where the acting came in, because everybody always says to me, how do you get into this? What's the first thing you have to do? And I'd say, you have to be an actor. You know, somebody says, I have a great voice, that means nothing to me. You have to be an actor. You have to know how to switch. You have to know how to change. You have to come up with something else. And this was tremendous work. This was literally, when you asked that question earlier, how much was on the page and how much was us, it was on the page, but that was just words. We had to bring life to it. And when people say to me, well, I can do that, and I say, let me hear it. You know, because students and companies, that's not going to do it. It's not, it's just not eventually, but not right now. You have to take action.
The compliment is that they were fully realized characters. I think Transformers and G.I. Joe, which I have in my mind in the same place because they were both overlapping each other and happening generally in the same time frame of my life. But I think it was kind of a perfect storm because when we get the material, you have to honor the artwork. There's clues in there. You have to honor the breakdown. The writer has furnished you with a lot of the third dimension just by the way they describe things. But I've had this conversation at conventions with Flint Dilley, who was the story editor and producer and did a lot of the writing, and some of the other writers as well. If they're terrific writers, they can't write badly just because they have to insert a product line into what they're doing. If we're actors who only perceive the things that we're going to do in 3 dimensions, not 2, something good is going to happen. The writing, intentionally or unintentionally, is going to be as good as the writers who do it, the artists who do it. So somehow, and all you have to do as evidence of this is look at the longevity of the franchise, at least our portion of it, to realize that there was like a harmonic convergence of people that were all destined to do this work together, and this work was destined to have a life that went on and on. And for all the frustrations in studio and rewriting sessions, which goes to your other question, if Scatman brought his ukulele, I didn't care when we went back to work. I just wanted him to hold court and play ukulele. I also think those incredibly long sessions unintentionally allowed us all to bond as friends for life. That doesn't happen in more contemporary settings where normally you're acting in a vacuum. You walk in, you don't even see the other people in the scenes you're in. You record by yourself. We did everything in the same sandbox, for lack of a better word, and we got to play with each other. And if the material is serious, it becomes more intense. If the material is Smurfs and fun, that becomes contagiously more fun. If Jonathan Winters is there, forget about it. I just think you have to at least acknowledge the X factor in something. You don't know what has long life and what doesn't. You just do the work. But thank you for the compliment of fully realized characters. That's what every actor wants to hear.
Well, let me just jump in for a second, and I have to pay tribute to my fellow actors. They made me better. Transformers was only my second job in animation, and being with these guys, and Peter, and Frank, and Chris Latta, and all the rest of them, all the regulars in the cast, made me better. Because I saw what they were doing. I saw how he handled the micro. Oh, I see, he goes in a little bit when he wants to be quiet. That's how you work that mic, I get that. And Michael taught me, Alan taught me. Greg didn't teach me anything. But I learned from these guys how to be better, how to be deeper, how to understand this process even more than I would have before. So it's a testament, I think, to the group more than anything. We worked off of one another. When Wally would let us do more than one line, we worked off of one another. True. And we had a room full of actors. We had stand-up comics. We had, I was going to say magicians. We didn't have any magicians, unfortunately.
Is this your card?
We had strippers.
Paul Winchell.
Yeah, so that's my take on how did you get to some of the depth of the characters. Is we, at least for me, I took it. We learned. Yeah, exactly, Alan. We learned from each other.
It's a brilliant comment, and I learned from the magicians.
Paul, you never learned anything.
I learned from Roger C. Carmel. Roger C. Carmel was Harry Mudd on the original Star Trek. And he was insane. And when I hadn't been to LA for too long when all this happened. And when I got there and saw people like Alan, and Clyde Rebel and people that When I was a little shaver, I would watch these guys, no, when I was a young actor, I was a god, that I'm working, I've arrived. I'm working with these dudes that have been monsters in the industry, not just voiceover, but actors. And we always go back to, it's acting. It's not just voiceover, it's acting. And I was just so thrilled to be in the room with these guys, except for Gregg.
I remember somebody asking me, can you teach me how to do comedy? I said, no, you cannot teach comedy. You either have a sense of timing and the ridiculousness of a situation. It cannot be taught. It's the way you interpret it.
Thank you, that was really funny.
That was fun.
That's $150 a lesson.
That's perfect.
And you have another question?
So as you guys get into these big 8-hour recording sessions for a 60-plus episode show, and once the writers of the show are really seeing how you guys are adding to these characters and really bringing them to life, how much back and forth is there between you and the writing staff? Like, was it pretty collaborative or none?
Didn't know, I didn't know there was anybody else in the world but us. Us and Wally, that's all I knew. I didn't know any of the writers and the artists. At that point, I learned, I met them at the conventions, but I didn't know them certainly beforehand.
They were behind that glass with Wally and the engineer, and maybe some people from Hasbro. No, we had absolutely no. At least I had nothing to do with any of the writers, and I wouldn't, because you should see some of these people. I mean, they're disgusting.
Well, I just knew that when Alan was performing, there would be these guys behind the glass going. So that's how I knew they were writers.
And also, we didn't have that much time.
I want to answer this question directly. It's very important. The writers learn from us as much as we learn from them. If you came up with something, who knows where Skeletor's laugh came from? But when they heard it, let's write for that. And I've had that the same experience in Hogan's Heroes and in Get Smart. You did something, and the writer says, "Jesus, we'll develop that." So it is conspiratorial in a sense.
It's collaborative. It is collaborative, but the same as the other guys. I've met so many writer, producers, story editors in convention settings or in panel settings at the time. But what Alan's saying is, without having a conversation about it, they knew on that side of the glass when something resonated, either a character or a catchphrase or whatever it was. You began to see it was showing up, which was like a pat on the back that something you did caused them to do something that grew out of what you did. But it wasn't collaborative in the doing of it, and yet it was on a higher level.
They took a cue.
Exactly.
Well, you know the Flintstones. I mean, the Abba Dabba Doo, the main character, obviously. Alan Reed, I think it was.
Yep.
Yeah.
When he read it, there was no Abba Dabba Doo in the script. He did that, and that became incorporative. That became a catchphrase for that character. And it's happened to all of us in some way that we do something that they go, oh, yeah, I like that. Let's write that. Let's put that in. Because that also helps the actor, because it's much more fun doing that. Otherwise, as I tell students, it's just words on a page. It doesn't mean anything if you don't bring any life to it.
Yeah.
And then are you recording the season sort of in chunks so that it allows for that process a little bit? Or are you doing
one a week.
Are you doing
It was
all
1
season?
week, wasn't it?
we did one a week.
We did 1 week.
Sometimes.
I grew old doing it. Yeah, it was 1 week. I'd be standing next to you.
We could grow old
We
together.
could go all together, right?
right.
Okay.
That's a beautiful thing to see.
Can I make a comment about
At
the
the beginning of my career, I was doing a series in New York called Mack and Meyer for Hire, which was really garbage. But anyway, the first episode, I just ad-libbed, "Oovy groovy." Put that in every episode. It had nothing to do with the character of the situation, but we managed to work in oovy groovy. Who knows?
Yeah.
I was going to say, let's open it up to the crowd here.
Great.
See if you guys have anything.
Oh, my God.
Let's go. You, sir, right here. Mhm.
Thank you for our childhood. We can all say that.
You're still a child.
Two parts question. One, when you guys were doing your voice acting and your careers, have you ever, like, you know, you're supposed to be doing Skeletor, but then all of a sudden you break into Man-at-Arms, or like you're supposed to be doing, you know, Perceptor, but then you break into Grimlock or something or whatever, you know, you're just, because you have so many gigs, you overlap different voices with whoever it is.
So you're indicating that we're schizophrenic? That's what you're saying? That we don't know who we really are, is that what you're saying? Because I played killers and rapists, and trust me, I'm not a rapist. Okay, good. I'm sure you guys want to answer that.
This is the three faces of Eve here.
I think the big question, right, is when you're doing so many different characters across so many shows, like how do you keep them all straight, right?
Well, as an actor, you lock into whatever character you happen to be doing at the time. I've seen Frank Welker do scenes with himself as different characters. He's that good. But generally, when you're doing a character, you're pretty much locked into that thing. If you're, you know, once you have a sense of who that character is. So it's not that easy to drift somewhere else, at least for me anyway.
I think this goes back to that comment about fully realized characters. If you have done the work, the homework, and you know who you are and you're grounded in that character, you never forget how they sound. You never confuse them with how another fully realized character sounds. The trouble comes up with the peripheral characters that are often dealt out like cards during a session. That's harder to retain because you haven't had time to do the homework. But I think once, what Dan said, once you know who you are, you know how it sounds.
Well, Jonathan Winters during the Smurfs was brought in after about the third season, I think, of the Smurfs. He did 106 seasons, it seems like years. And Jonathan was brought in, and he had to play Grandpa Smurf, not Papa Smurf. That was Don Messick. And we did one show, and when we came back for the second show the next week, he started his character, and Gordon Hunt, rest his soul, wonderful director, said, Jonathan, that's not the voice. He's your Grandpa Smurf. That wasn't the voice you used. He goes, oh, did I use this one? And he said, no, that wasn't. He said, was it this one over here? And he said, no, Jonathan, that wasn't. He said, well, was it over here? What you did? He said, no, Jonathan. I turned around and said, Jonathan, you're suffering from voice-Heimers. Play it back for him. Yeah. And he remembers what it was he did. So much going on in his head, even just because of that one character. But as Gregg says, for most of us, once you get locked into that character, it's a little hard to drift. It really is. Even though you're going to another session, another show, you might, hopefully, use the same voice. You might use that same character. God knows I've done it, and hope they didn't catch me. And they didn't. Just went ahead and did it. I said, hope they're not watching the other show because it's the same damn voice I used for that show.
The only time that would ever happen, possibly happen, would be when you're talking to yourself. You're doing your main character, and then they throw a second character at you, and there's a moment where you talk to yourself. So you're flipping back and forth. But generally, it's not an issue.
I love doing that. I did on He-Man. I would not do one character all the way through and then go back and do the other. I would do Skeletor talking to Merman, talking to Man-at-Arms. And I love to do that because I could hear how I fed myself. Right. So me. Oh, don't talk to me. Don't shut up. Oh, how dare you do something. I mean, it's a lot of fun, you know. It's real ham.
Another question. Somebody died. You want to put
You're right here.
I know you guys done tons and tons of shows. Do you have, any of you, do you have a favorite episode of Transformers that you had you hold dear to your hearts?
Was there a favorite episode of Transformers?
I have a few. I have the whole
Grimlock's New Brain.
Grimlock's New Brain for sure. But the Fire in the Sky arc with Skyfire when he's created Decepticon and then discovered out of the ice Autobot, he doesn't know if he's good or bad or what he is. I think that's pretty interesting conflict.
I like going inside Megatron.
Oh, my gosh.
I beg your pardon?
To save Megatron when we shrunk down. Yeah, last night. Like, save yourself last time. Yeah, that was it. For me, I like that one.
I have no particular memory because I had a life.
Well, then I'm not naming mine.
I have no recollection at all.
You're lucky to still be awake. What's another question?
Can we go right here?
Friends.
It's great to hear that you guys are so tight-knit, and I'm curious though, with that many bodies running in and out of the booth all the time, was there any person that you can remember that when they walk in you just go, oh God, no?
Oh, yeah. Michael Bell.
We're not going to mention that, are we?
No, we're not
Oh, no,
going
he's
there.
here. I don't think anybody's going to do
Yeah,
that.
you're not gonna get us to do
You're
that.
not
No,
gonna
no.
get it.
You're
No.
gonna be Aaron.
God, I hate you.
Yeah.
You're next.
It's a nice try, though.
Yeah, we'll tell you later. No.
You did say Arthur.
I've actually engineered with other voiceover actors. That's what I do now. And I noticed when we do stuff for video games, we are using that voice actor's facial expressions and sometimes their whole body to animate what they're voicing. In your guys' case, did anything you ever do change the way the show itself was animated? I heard you guys talking before, maybe you got a phrase that got repeated over and over. But did it ever change the animation where they went back and said, oh, he can't be looking like that, that's how he sounds?
Well, not necessarily. I wanted to go back a beat, where we were talking about catchphrases and stuff. To my mind, to my memory, there wasn't much ad-libbing on our show. I mean, Wally kept us tied to that script pretty tightly. I don't recall very much. We had very little leeway that way. In fact, we had very little leeway in our performances frequently. If you didn't mimic exactly what Wally, we've said this many, many times, but Wally had a reading in his head. And until you hit that reading, you were not moving on. So early in the game, I figured out how to deal with this. I would just say, after a couple of takes, he still wasn't getting it. I'd say, Wally, what do you want? He'd do it, I'd mimic him, we'd move on. But as far as ad-libbing and that sort of thing, and as far as affecting the writing or any of the animation, I don't think so.
Here's a story I tell, and it's a true story. Well, we did the movie, obviously, Transformers, and the great Orson Welles played the World, which was apropos, because he was almost as large. And I desperately wanted to be on the set with him. Because Orson Welles, when you get a chance to meet the great Orson Welles, well, I said, no, there would be nobody on this set except the engineers and myself. And I said, oh, I can play an engineer. I can do an engineer voice. I can say engineer stuff. Did you get that, Wally? You know, I can just, whatever it is you want me to. He said, no, you can't do it. And I heard later on that when Orson Welles was doing it, Wally at one point gave him a line reading, because that's Wally's nature. Didn't like the way it was, and Orson Welles? You're going to give Orson Welles a line? Wally Berg is Orson. And Orson Welles said, are you giving me a line reading, Orson? And Wally said, no, he caught it immediately. He heard the voice. He said, no, not at all, I wouldn't do that. Not long after that, Orson Welles died, and I told everybody Wally Berg killed Orson Welles. And it finally got back to him years later. He said, did you really die? I said, yes, I did. Because that would kill me if somebody if I had the kind of quality, if I had the kind of career that Orson Welles had, and the director, some cocky moon director said to me, that's not the, that gave me a line reading, it would kill me. So.
Nothing.
Who else?
Someone way in the back over there, too.
Right here.
Oh, we flub lines all the time. Oh my God, if you, not only do we flub lines, if you got the outtakes of those sessions, you could make a fortune
You know who?
blackmailing us.
Yeah, you know who it was? You know, and God love him, we all loved him, Scatman. He was
Oh,
terrible.
that's right.
He would flub line after line after line, but he was, what a sweet and gentle and wonderful person. I would never say anything bad about him.
I must tell you, Scatman, I did a show for Hanna-Barbera called Snow White Meets the Harlem Globetrotters. Have no idea why Sylvan ever came up with that concept. Please, Snow White Meets the Harlem Globetrotters. And Scatman was on it with Robert O'Keefe's a wonderful, wonderful actor. They were the Harlem Globetrotters. And a wonderful comic, I forgot his name at this point, myself, Lucy Taylor, who's does millions of voices, and she's Donald Duck's wife and all these wonderful characters. She's Daisy Duck and all these wonderful. Can't hear you.
You had mentioned some of the voice actors would do characters talking to each other. So like Frank Welker doing Megatron and Soundwave.
Right.
Having a conversation. Were those moments more difficult or not really? I'm just curious what it's like. Basically doing two characters talking to each other. I'm curious what that was like.
He wants to know what the two characters were talking to each other, that Frank Welker did.
Frank was so facile. Frank was so facile that it was not a problem.
And is.
And continues to be. Yeah, continues to be. No, it's not a problem. And generally, I think most of us, if we had to do that, Alan has done it, I'm sure most of us have. It's not that difficult. It's really, once you sort of...
It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And once you sort of set those
that.
characters, you can switch pretty quickly. But Frank is a master at it, of course.
And the joke with Frank was when he had a dialogue with himself, that the engineer would then say, I think you overlapped, which is impossible.
Frank, we did a series together over at Hanna-Barbera, and we had to talk underwater. And I didn't know how to do that. So when they said, Mike, Gordon said, you're playing this octopus, whatever the heck it was, and he said, and talk underwater, so now talk to Frank's character. And I went, I took some water, I went, okay, and I'm choking. And I took some coffee, and I went, okay, and then Gordon says, wait a minute, Frank, you do it. And Frank went, all right, here's what we're gonna do. And I said, why didn't you tell me how to do that? And he said, because it was so much fun watching you.
You realize you waterboarded yourself.
I waterboarded myself.
I was blown away by Beachcomber when you did it.
What's
that?
Sea spray.
Yeah, sea spray.
Like a gargle, talk like a gargle.
I don't do this, that's a cheat.
Yes, because I could do that if I had no teeth.
While you're doing that. If you can gargle, you can talk.
I'm so thirsty.
And on that note, let's give these guys a huge round of applause. Can you let everyone know where you'll be for the rest of the day? Are you guys still here? Are you taking off?
I'm going drinking.
We're in the signing room. I
Yeah,
think
we're
we're all
in the
kind of nicely
Yeah.
put together.
Yeah, for the next
So we're
hour.
having, little straw fights where we're throwing things at each
You're
other.
in the signing
You were
room.
taking
I've
a
seen
selfie.
our x-rays, so you better come and get your signatures real quick.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.